In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to work an invisible vertical seam, which is great for seaming ribbing together, as you can see here. This is all crocheted ribbing and I've just seamed it here. You can kind of tell, but you can't really even see the yarn I used to seam it with. And I think it's great for joining panels together, ribbing together, and yeah, I hope that you can find many applications to this technique because I think it's a very useful one. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so here I've just worked two little small squares of ribbing, and now I'm going to show you how to seam them together using a vertical seam. So right now I'm going to use a contrast color so you can see what I'm doing, but obviously if you're doing this on a real project, you would use the same color yarn. So the first thing to note is that you want to see how my ribbing is facing up. And so what I mean by that is that the little V stitches found on my ribbing, so these little V's that I'm pointing at, they're facing up. Their point is facing up. All right? Just like this. So that's important to make sure that both of your pieces are positioned in this way before you start, and not like this where the V's are pointing down. So we don't want that. We're going to turn our work and make sure that they're facing like this. Alright, so to begin, I'm just going to start here on this left piece, and I'm going to find this first, what I'll call a knit row, because it looks, you know, like it's knit. So I'm going to find this first knit row here, and I'm going to be working all along this knit row for this piece, and for this piece I'll be working all along this knit row right here. So make sure you can identify those. Alright, so now to begin, I'm going to go ahead and find the first stitch of this knit row where I'm going to be working in. So that's, the first stitch is kind of the hardest one to find, but that's this one right here. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my needle into the middle of that stitch, and I'm going to use the tip of my needle to kind of lift, and you'll see that now there's a little horizontal bar right there. Alright, so that's where I want to work into. I'm inserting my needle here and using the tip of my needle to get under that bar, and I'm going to pull through. And for now I'm not going to anchor my yarn, I'm just going to leave it like a nice 10-inch tail, and I'll anchor my yarn later. Now I'm going to go to this other side here, my right piece, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to find the stitch at the bottom, which is this stitch right here. I'm going to insert my yarn, or my needle, sorry, in the middle of my stitch, and I'm going to poke the tip of my needle up and pass my needle underneath there. Alright, and I'm going to pull. And the nice thing about this seam is that you don't have to pull tightly as you go along. We can actually pull our seam all the way at the end, which is what I like doing, because I have this slack in the middle that allows me to navigate through both pieces comfortably. I feel like if I tighten it too much at the beginning, then it's harder for me to seam. So I'm going to leave it like this for now. Now I'm going to move to the next stitch above the one I just worked into. So this stitch right here, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to insert my needle into the middle of that stitch, and I'm going to use the tip of my needle to pull up and go underneath that horizontal bar. So if you're noticing, the horizontal bar is basically at the tip of my stitch here. So I'm going to insert and go under and pull through. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to go to the next stitch above the one we just worked into right here. I'm going to insert my needle and go to the tip of that stitch and use my needle to poke through and go underneath this horizontal bar. And that's essentially all you're going to do for the rest of your seam. You're just going to alternate going to the next stitch above, inserting your needle and poking the tip up so that you're going underneath that horizontal bar here. That's at the tip of that V in each stitch. And I'm just going to keep working like this all the way up my seam, and you'll see at the very end, once I gather or once I pull the seam tightly, you'll see that you won't really be able to see this blue yarn that I'm using, and it will be pretty seamless looking even though there is a seam. So I'm going to keep doing this and I'll show you how it looks like when I tighten it. Okay, so I finished weaving my needle through both sides, and this is what my seam is looking like so far. So obviously you can see the seam, but now I'm going to go ahead and pull it at both sides, and this is why I don't like anchoring it at the bottom when I start working my seam, because I like pulling from both sides. So here we can see that that seam is closed now, and I was just pulling until I felt resistance on both sides. And here we go, we can't even see that blue yarn, and if you can tell, this is right where we seamed our 2 rows together. And now I can use this tail end of yarn to kind of help close the seam here at the bottom, and I can use this tail end of yarn to help, you know, secure and close the seam at the top. But yeah, this is what it looks like with the right side facing out, and as you can see, it is pretty invisible. So I hope you found this video useful, and please let me know what other kinds of videos you'd like to see from me. I'm hoping to post more tutorials, or to post tutorials more often, so yeah, let me know what kinds of tutorials you want to see.